think I ought to say at the top of this one that us talking about Moloch the way that we're about to is not because you and I are the foremost of that conversation and we've got the PhDs that allow us to have the opinion. It's really because we've been speaking so much together and in the word about the passages that specifically name Moloch and discuss it in the context of sexual immorality and comparing that with Acts 15. We're coming from the place of believing that there is a problem that we can witness in our church and broader world today that is helpfully described with this language. So it's like the story is impelling us to have a conversation about it because we can identify it. But also maybe we have the willingness to broach the topic because we're not trapped in that massive ivory obelisk of intellectualism where we're just so high up that we feel like, oh, I'm not really qualified to talk about every nuance of this, and so I better just keep my mouth shut. I really only know this very specific shade of gray when it comes to the whole topic.
Right.
So we're at least willing to discuss it as well as we can understand it.
Well,
And
you made the very helpful observation that the more educated a person is, the more letters they have behind their name. Rightfully so, in many instances, the more humble they become because they are
you're more aware of what you don't know.
right. The more you know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so then to have a meaningful conversation can sometimes, about important issues, you can sometimes get lost in the unwillingness to address any of the problem or the possible answers because there's so many things that we don't know. And that is going back. We'll keep talking about this, but if all you do is evaluate facts as opposed to a story, you are doubly susceptible to that.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it's not. We aren't the cutting edge philosophers and PhDs on this issue of AI, but we are a father and a son who have what we believe to be an anchor point of objective
Mm-hmm.
truth and a timeless inspired text that gives us a story
Mm-hmm.
by which we actually feel compelled to try to talk about
Right.
the murky gray areas that are challenging us.
So that's what I don't see a lot of online when I'm looking at my sources to try to get a sense of what is all of this onto and why is this happening right now. I don't get a good read on the story that's underpinning it that helps to explain it. Like there's just not a lot of philosophical discussion about AI. It's really just science fiction right now.
Yeah.
What could be possible and why it's cool and maybe what books or movies it sounds like. But it is also a real fact of our life and a tool that man is using to further his evolution. And so I wish that there were people that were way smarter than me that were also reading the word and correlating it. Just haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
So if we're at least willing to do it, hopefully we can. It's like we're just getting it started.
Yeah.
And then somebody can pick it up and run with it where we can't.
I mean, most of what we've seen, most of what others have seen, I think, is there's some really informed conversation about the technical dynamics, geopolitical implications, economic implications, uh, but most of it is still, even within the skeptical realm of concern. Hey, this is leading us to some frightening places. That is not just balanced with, but uh, uh, that conversation is equally phrased in the hopeful potential of AI.
Mm-hmm.
It is, yes, it could be really, really bad, but it's so good, it could be really, really good. And none of that is actually backing up enough to an existential, philosophical, theological question of what does that mean for humanity?
Right.
It is how could it benefit humanity? How could it threaten humanity? But not how could it obliterate or diminish what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And so
We're taking a more telescopic sociological view rooted in the word, whereas the people that are really informed on this that are talking about it are taking a more microscopic view of all the minutia and the nuance about. They know all the abbreviations and so many components of the billions of parameters that an AI system does, but then they still have to throw up their hands at a certain point and say, well, there's this black box phenomenon and we don't really know what that is.
Right.
So we can just plainly say that's a spiritual phenomenon
Right.
and that's evidence of a problem. But they would be like, well, no, because we know the other hundreds of millions of things that are going on. We just don't know what that one is.
Right.
So it's a different framework, and that actually prevents them from having an opinion on it because they have to think as a scientist, well, I assume that nothing is true until I prove it to be true. So it's like the void is just nihilism. What I don't understand is irrelevant to me until I can profess that I understand it. But then when we're coming from a perspective rooted in faith, we would actually assume that the truth is not known to me. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist until I know it. It means that the truth is self-existent, and then I'm pursuing it.
Right.
So that's almost diametrically opposed to the scientific worldview.
Right.
So that allows us to then say, here's a new feature of this narrative that's emerging technologically.
Yes.
As opposed to what maybe let's call it atheistic scientific researcher of this problem that would just have to say, well, gosh, I have no clue where this is headed, but like these are some interesting features. But they would be not willing to talk about what they don't understand because that would be making an assumption.
Right.
We can not make assumptions, but we can faithfully follow the story and trust that it is onto something.
Right. They're breaking down the constituent components. We're back to the cup again. It's like, well, there's the handle, there's the spherical, there's the stuff inside, and looking at each of those individually doesn't necessarily lead to DEFCON 5. It is, well, this could be good, this could be bad, and who's to say? I think the very fact that Moloch has become a within the leading experts, Moloch is the name that defines the risk factor, and everyone knows that risk factor is enormous. We're going to look at a few of those experts commenting on this just to give us some context here. So,
yeah, you should go ahead and play the video.
All right, let's see.
Game theory. It's a force of bad incentives on a multi-agent system. Prisoner's dilemma is technically a kind of Moloch-y system as well, but it's just a two-player thing. But another word for Moloch is multipolar trap, where basically you just got a lot of different people all competing for some kind of prize. And it would be better if everyone didn't do this one shitty strategy, but because that strategy gives you a short-term advantage, everyone's incentivized to do it, and so everyone ends up doing it.
Okay, so the point about it being a multipolar trap, but it's also called Moloch, because the way they're not saying this is the Canaanite deity who's in AI, they're just talking about the noun Moloch that has come to be devoid of this context and is just referencing the problem of game theory, where like an easy example is when corn became genetically modified and it was called Roundup Ready corn, and that happened in the 90s. There was a product that was discovered as an herbicide, and they were able to find a bacteria. This company that developed it, that then got sued for it, found a bacteria that was not susceptible to, I think it's called glyphosate. It was this herbicide that would kill basically anything green, including corn. So they isolate this gene from a specific bacteria that wasn't susceptible to it, put it in the corn, and then instead of having a lot of hired hands that gotta weed the corn and just keep it from succumbing to natural problems, they were able to just have Roundup Ready corn branded and genetically modified to be not susceptible to Roundup and pesticides, that you could just crop dust over your entire field of corn. And then in a very short period of time, historically speaking, we went from having natural corn to having Roundup Ready corn. What I heard was RFK Jr. talked about it on Joe Rogan. I think he said it was 90 to 95% of corn in the early 90s was Roundup Ready corn. So there wasn't that even 10 years prior to that.
Right.
But it happened so fast because you have to imagine being a farmer, maybe you're a fifth generation farmer. You've been farming seed corn your whole life. And now there's this new GMO corn. It grows bigger, it grows stronger, it's less susceptible. It's way cheaper to basically just gas the corn than it is to pay a bunch of hired hands to be meticulously managing that. Maybe you get a better yield. Nothing else is going to grow in your soil. It's got all these pros and cons, and you're weighing it out and thinking, I need this crop in order to continue the legacy and feed my family. And everybody else around me is doing Roundup Ready corn. So unless I do that, I'm going to not be participating competitively in the market. So it kind of forces your hand.
Right.
I need to now grow Roundup Ready corn. That's the Moloch problem in the competitive arena of corn farming.
Right. You're taking Moloch in the way we're going to talk about it, but you're kind of giving an older kind of application. We could go back even further. When I was a kid, it was the MAD, mutually assured destruction, in the nuclear arms race between America and Russia, where everyone knows this is bad. Everyone knows there's no good outcome to this. We don't just have enough weapons to destroy the planet. We have enough weapons to destroy the planet 1,000 times over. Mm-hmm. But we're going to make one more bomb. Because if they have one more, then we need to have 3 more. And if we have 3 more, then they need to have 5 more. And so you're constantly escalating the negative outcome to somehow deter the enemy from gaining an advantage, even though it is to everyone's disadvantage to continue.
Which is what Liv was saying. It's a terrible strategy, but it's a necessary strategy if you're going to remain competitive in that environment.
So in the farmer situation, now his ground is actually barren in its ability to produce anything else.
Yes.
Except corn. Because what he's putting on it is killing the soil's capacity to produce anything else. But the corn is immune, so he gets a beautiful corn crop. And he has to have that beautiful corn crop because every farm around him has a Roundup Ready crop. And now they're all single crop. They're limited. If anything comes along that destroys that crop, they're stuck. And we are now eating this genetically modified crop that nobody even knows is new to the last 20 years. It's just the same corn we thought it always was, but it's not.
Right. It's in your high fructose corn syrup. It's in the animals that you eat that use corn as the main part of their diet. It's harmful to humans. It's harmful to the animals that eat it. It's harmful to the soil because the glyphosate that they're spraying on it, I hope I'm saying that right, that product that they're using is chemically destroying anything that can grow unless it has that particular genetic strain that's been engineered. So it's bad for the soil. It's bad for the humans. It's actually bad for the crops, except for the corn that then we eat. It's not actually helping anybody, but that's what had to be grown in order for the farmer to remain in business.
So 200 years ago, you grow your own corn, you feed your family. 50 years ago, you go to the grocery store, you buy corn, you feed your family. And now we think we're doing basically that same thing.
Right.
We go to the store, young mother, young father, hey, I'm going to get something nutritious.
Yeah.
But we're getting something that is now a part of a system that has so many other factors controlling it that the product isn't the same, but we think it is.
Yeah, the impetus behind that problem is what they call the problem of Moloch, or you can call it a multipolar trap. It's like it's a game theory problem, so it happens in tons of different environments.
So let's keep watching. Let's see some other. This is Jonathan Pajot, I think.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know why I hesitate to talk about it, but I will talk about it, and I'll talk about it through one interesting tack, which is, someone called attention for me to what they call the Moloch alignment problem. And to be honest, I never heard of this issue. It's something in game theory. It's kind of a scenario in game theory. And it's interesting, first of all, it's called Moloch. It's based on a Ginsberg poem. And basically, it's the idea in some ways that technology has a will of its own, you could say, and it seems to have a kind of agency that no one can stop, like no one can act against. And the people that are behind this this notion of agency, I don't know if they totally see it as a full agency or if they just see it as a kind of illusion of agency or mock agency. But in the end, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because it's definitely experienced as a kind of agency in the same way that you would experience individually something on you that you can't totally control, a force or a process in your own behavior, like an addiction or something like that, that you can't stop, that you can tell the person, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop smoking? Why don't you just stop doing whatever it is that you're doing that you're addicted to? But for some reason, they get caught in this agency.
Being caught in the agency that's a helpful phrase to use, because when you're it's where the theory of general relativity comes in. Like the intellectuals that we're talking about that are just so advanced in their specific knowledge that they don't really know how to talk about this more broadly. The perspective on the ground is this thing looks like it's flying of its own accord.
Right.
It clearly has its own agenda. But if you're really at the top and you know the guys that are running those companies that are telling those engineers to do that thing with that particular AI product, you can be like, no, it's just all black and white, ones and zeros. There's not really agency. That's just how it looks to you.
Right.
But I think the point is how it looks to me.
Right.
I'm not going to relate to it and take your word for it if you're on purpose releasing products that are harmful to me.
Right.
So I have to come to my own conclusion.
Right.
And
So the idea, though, that what we want to start to hone in on, kind of moving, I hope people are tracking with us, but the idea that technology can essentially begin to develop its own will, or has an accumulated pattern of motion and momentum that it is like will. It's moving in a direction on its own that we would compare to agency.
Yeah, and idolatry for that matter, because
Right.
that's where it's really hard to like what we're trying to do is toe the line between here's just a merely rational explanation of what's going on, but then in both of our minds is like the greater spiritual understanding
Right.
that actually informs our rational mind. So I think here we just have to say plainly it's evidence of idolatry
Right.
when we see something take on a life of its own that ought not to have a life of its own.
Right. And that is given such devotion and attention and care and money and
Yeah.
all of that.
Can you pull up the Leviticus passage?
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to note, though, we aren't saying the agency is Moloch. The Moloch, technically in these terms, is a game theory description
Yeah.
of the race to the bottom,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Moloch is that mutually assured destruction. It's I'm surrounded by 5 farms, and if I don't do this one thing that's actually
Mhm.
bad, I'm going to be worse off.
Mm-hmm.
So I enter into the same negative problem that everyone else is in, or I lose relative to them, even though we all know we're all losing as we do it.
Yeah, but that's why it's useful to tie it into the biblical understanding of the
Yeah.
problem, because well, yeah, so here's a verse in Leviticus: don't give any of your children to be sacrificed to Moloch. It's with an E, but it's the same word. You must not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And then there's another one in Leviticus. It's in chapter 20, but it's a reframing of chapter 18. This is coming within the context of the sexual purity laws. So that's how we have to understand Moloch, the way that the Bible understands Moloch.
Yeah, and actually, that's a very interesting. I want to go back and actually let's read it. But that was one of the insights we kind of got along the way here. Is in the middle of warning about the problem of sexual deviance in any number of ways, it inserts this warning against worshiping Moloch.
Yeah.
And Moloch was a deity that it was one of the big 3 or 4 in terms of warnings that Yahweh gave to the Israelites. You had Baal, you had Ashtart, you had Moloch. And Moloch was probably the rarest in terms of reference, but the most virulent in terms of warning. The Lord would strongly warn. He would say, what Moloch is asking you to do, which was to sacrifice their children. It was, they built an image called the Topheth that would represent Moloch with outstretched arms. And there's different illustrations of it, but basically the parents would come and to receive the blessing of the god in some other way, they would have to sacrifice one of their children to it. And it would be lit on fire and heated up, and the people would bang drums and blow trumpets to drown out the cries of the children that were literally being offered, sacrificed alive, burned alive to Moloch, supposedly for some future advantage
Right.
or blessing, but they were sacrificing their children now to get that. And that warning, Yahweh says, the thing Moloch is demanding of you has never even occurred to me. I'm not that kind of God. I don't think that way. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God of generations and life, not the God that demands life. And yet this is in the midst of the sexual purity laws and everything else. This is outlined with such force, and it is the name that has been applied to this present dilemma.
Yeah, let me try to triangulate this point a bit, because we've talked in the past about how not every technology is an idol, because not every tool is an idol, but when you're using an idol, it is functioning as a tool because you're utilizing it to gain something that you wouldn't otherwise, which is so that it's used as a sacrificial tool, you could say, but still without it, you wouldn't be able to get what you wanted to get. So when we're trying to hold biblical Moloch in one hand and the game theory problem of Moloch in the other hand, we could say that's just a pure coincidence. It's really coming from the Allen Ginsberg poem. Who really cares where he got it from? The point is, it's more of like a commentary on capitalism. But then why is that the same name that was explicitly outlawed in the law of Moses?
Right.
And twice in Leviticus.
Right.
And always within sexual purity laws. Because I think that sexual purity and idolatry are better viewed as two sides of the same coin, rather than trying to think, why is that inserted artificially into the sexual purity laws? It's because it deals with betrayal of a spiritual kind.
Yeah.
It's concerned with how the concept of fornication being the depraving and the contamination of what's pure. And so what's happening when you worship an idol is you are elevating above what ought to be elevated, the artificial projection of your desire, which is contaminating God in your mind. And that's what if you believe the body is a temple, then when you're engaging in sexually perverse behavior, what you're doing according to scripture is defiling the temple. So it has to do with contamination and defiling. And that's what a lot of the law of Moses has dealt with, is cleanliness and orderliness, and making sure that the people are set aside to God by preventing from profaning things and by keeping things holy. It's very much to do with the preventing contamination.
Well, and we did address this, but the whole idea of idolatry being referenced in terms of Yahweh's reaction to it is it's in the context of jealousy. He's jealous, and therefore these are provocations, because idolatry represents unfaithfulness. And it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal. And it's not that he is so weak and needy that he needs our attention and he's like, why won't you look at me and love me? It's that we tend to look at what we value the most and find the most beautiful. And if we aren't actually looking at and giving our attention to what is most beautiful, we are going to be conformed to the image of what we do give our attention to.
And it also represents it deep down. That's what so many people can relate to that. That's probably the most common standard of marriage, any consensual relationship where you're like, oh yeah, I will be with this person if they do anything unless they cheat on me.
Right.
Because then it's different.
Right.
But why is it different?
Right.
Well, what's the problem if what is unique about that thing that they would do to you that would say that far and no further? That's where I'm drawing the line. Because there is something about being with another person sexually that is the revelation of inside. I'm not actually with you deep down with my partner. I'm saying
Right.
deep down, I would rather consort with who I want to consort with, and I'm just
Right.
with you in the other ways, which then look trivial compared to what I actually want deep in my heart.
Right.
So that's where God is coming from when he's using the language of being betrothed to Israel and mothering and fathering Israel. And all of these are family languages, what's holding the family
Relational
unit together.
connection.
Yeah, exactly. And so when Daniel refuses to bow to the idol, that was him taking the stand of, I refuse to participate in the corporate betrayal of my God.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not these are pagan people, they're Babylonians, or whether or not these are Jews, but we're in captivity, and so they just don't want to get hurt. That he's saying, I refuse to. He's the farmer that said, I mean, this is kind of a weird analogy, but he's not willing to participate in the
Right.
game,
Right.
even though it's not a great strategy, but then at least I'm competing. I'm
Yeah,
at
that's
least
Daniel in
relevant.
prayer 3 times a day in different settings where he Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with the idol,
Right.
not refusing to what did you say? Participate in the
And
disloyalty.
I
or
think
what-
the corporate betrayal.
Corporate
is how I said
betrayal,
it. Yeah,
yeah.
because they're saying, we'll take those odds. That's the game y'all are playing, and we'll play it our way.
Right.
And we'll see who God justifies.
Right.
And we do see who God justifies
Right.
against all odds.
Right.
So when we talk about the modern problem of Moloch, I don't see how it's that unrelated to the way that it's presented in the Old Testament. I just think now it's kind of couched in this science fiction reality of nuclear warheads and artificial intelligence. And so you can kind of just focus on that, and it feels more topical and purely related to technology. But as we talked about before, I think deep in the heart is the real intention of, I want to sacrifice my children for a better future.
So it is interesting. It's striking me even just now that rather unusual combination, which you've noted, of all of these sexual purity laws, who who is permitted to have sex together and who is not, and so it prohibits what should be obvious. You don't have sex with animals. You don't have, all of that. But it actually has to spell it out because the culture was so permissive and so debaucherous that there was a mixing and mingling in the most immoral of ways, where what is meant to be sacred within the confines of a committed love and to produce life and therefore sustain the generations. So we've touched on the jealousy aspect of God in relation to that, but at its heart, the subject matter is all about what is sacred in the Imago Dei. A man and a woman represent the wholeness of the image of God. A man and a woman can come together and experience that wholeness together. If it's outside of that, and a man and a woman have come together, and now the man or the woman are looking to join with someone else, a brother, a father, an animal, same gender, whatever it is, now they're looking to produce, or they're actually looking in an illicit way to something that is outside of what can be blessed, and it's threatening life and future generations. And then Moloch is put right in the middle of that. Yes, it's about faithfulness. Yes, it's about jealousy, God's jealous desire for our best in relation to him and one another. But it is also Moloch threatening the generations, because even if a mother and father come together and they're doing all of that right, but they are willing to sacrifice their child for some other advantage, this is terrible on every level.
Yeah, I think it's just more obvious when it's put in that language, because you don't have to. It's still matching the symbolic content of the other acts that are outlawed, but the transaction is more obvious. Is
Right,
my point.
right.
You are literally handing over the responsibility of your posterity to the deity.
So this
You're
is
doing that in the other acts,
right.
but
So this is what is so shocking to us: is how is this ancient Canaanite deity?
why is his name in our mouths right now?
Right.
Why is it relevant right now?
Right.
In artificial intelligence.
So a Ginsberg poem talks about it, and they say, well, it's referencing the Ginsberg poem, but why? That's not satisfying
yeah,
to me.
it is, but that only goes back 100 years.
Right.
This is going back how many thousands of years?
5,000 years.
Yeah.
So there's an ancient Canaanite deity who created a belief system that if you will sacrifice your child, I'll give you an advantage in some other way. And now that name is what defines the race to the bottom of AI. The Molochian problem, the dilemma of Moloch. What's the what?
Oh, it's called the problem of Moloch.
The problem of Moloch is how all of these technology insiders are describing, hey, there's a lot to gain here from AI, but we all, wink, wink, secretly acknowledge there's not a good outcome here.
It's also been like in American high society talking about politicians and the types of members only groups that allow a lot of politicians to maintain their status. Bohemian Grove has been putting on an annual production of, well, not what's it called? It's on their website, for God's sake. It's called like the Sacrifice of Care to Moloch.
Right.
It's literally right there for you
Right,
to see.
right.
They've been doing it for 100 years. And they all gather for
The elite
this-
of the elite.
Yeah, and so they gather to see this this enactment of, there's a giant statue. It's an owl, but his name is Moloch. And then they bring out worldly care, like Care. That's the name of this innocent person that's sacrificed to Moloch, because it symbolizes, let go of your worries and your concerns. Sacrifice that to the future in the name of a better time right now for you.
Right.
And there's a weird analog to how the World Economic Forum wants to talk about overpopulation. There's too many people. And so they're like, those are the ones that should be sacrificed, is what they're implying, so that we who remain can have a better present and a better tomorrow by killing off the ones that maybe aren't really useless eaters, is what they call them.
Right.
Now, you got to have a sick mind, but you can call a child a useless eater.
Right.
What are they working on?
Right.
What are they doing? What if I could give them up in the name of a better future for tomorrow?
Right.
Well, that is what the World Economic Forum wants us to do.
Right.
And this is what folks talk about on Twitter. They lament about the people that they don't agree with politically, and how you can just go so far into the weeds with that type of mentality, where you really look at your brother as your enemy.
Right.
As a useless eater, is just an unimportant consumer. I'm the good consumer.
Right.
You're just getting in the way of what I ought to consume, and now we're running out of that. So here's all this new political justification to continue sacrificing our children.
Well, I mean, the most obvious, we're talking about it in terms of AI and an existential threat to humanity. But the legalization of abortion is a sacrifice to Moloch. There's no way around it. And I have all the compassion in the world. I'm not trying to talk about the pain of the woman who has gone through that difficult decision.
That's
for
why it's
any
difficult
number,
to talk about.
Right. There are very real pressures and challenges and guilt associated with that. And I have great compassion, and I believe the Lord wants to really tenderly care for a woman who has made that decision and learned to regret it. But as a society, since the 1920s, when Russia legalized abortion, in I think it was 2018, there was a study done to compile the national statistics since abortion had become legalized. I think it was 1921 in Russia. Over 1 billion children have been sacrificed. 1 billion around the world. And there were all kinds of reasons. Well, they're going to be born into poverty. They have Down syndrome. They've got this problem. Useless feeders, advantage to the parents, economically, challenging circumstances, whatever. It doesn't change the fact that 1 billion lives have been sacrificed to some idea of a greater good. And you can't look at that and not see Moloch at work. And yet now, with all of the justifications politically and philosophically that have accumulated over the decades of abortion, we are ripe for the picking in terms of let's take this up a notch to a system that will be so pervasive around the world, we will literally sacrifice all our future generations for whatever advantage AI can give us, even to the point of sacrificing the idea of humanity itself.
Yeah, because some of the logic has just become so twisted that, I mean, when you unfortunately have an abortion, what you're saying is, I want to have a miscarriage. So in Exodus 23,
Here, let me look at that.
oh yeah, it's yeah, we've got it on there too. In Exodus 23, you shall not bow down to their gods, talking about the gods of the Canaanites and the Amorites, which would certainly include Moloch. You shall utterly demolish them, is what my translation says. Break their pillars into pieces. In verse 25, when you worship the Lord your God, I will bless your bread. I will bless your water. I will take away sickness from among you. No one shall miscarry or be barren in the land. I will fulfill the number of your days. And then it goes on to continue how the evidence of the Lord's blessing of the people who are honoring the covenant. But how we're talking about pesticides that poison our bread. It poisons the wheat. But the Lord will bless the wheat. The atrazine that's in the water and things that have been scientifically even proven to cause chemical castration in animals, but it's in the drinking water, and this has been known for years. It's not
And the statistics are on the rise. The problem of low sperm count, different reproductive issues in both men and women, that they're trying to figure out what it is, but are we willing to do something about it once we get the answer?
Right. Like this is publicly available information.
Right.
I didn't do these studies. I haven't tested the water.
Right.
If I know this, and there's tons of people that know this. So the water is poisoned. But if we worship the Lord, our water will be blessed. Our bread is poisoned. It's all genetically modified. But if we worship the Lord, he'll bless the bread. We're sick and dying of COVID, but if we worship the Lord, he will take sickness away from among us. We're miscarrying, sometimes on purpose. But if we worship the Lord, no one shall miscarry or be barren. We're dying early, but if we worship the Lord, he will fulfill the number of our days. So that's the promise, to have a full, holistic, healthy life.
And it's not just worship the Lord in the sense of making that choice. It's the binary of all of those things are first contrasted with the worship of the pagan
right.
gods.
You shall not bow down to their gods,
right,
or worship them or follow their practices. And it says elsewhere, it uses the language of the land itself will vomit you out.
Right.
So it's coming from the top down. God says, here's what I'm going to do. And he's saying from the bottom up, the earth will not tolerate this.
Right.
So what we're doing is opposed to what's natural, although it's done in this Gaia worship attitude of Mother Earth and how we have this ethical obligation to serve the earth. But then the things that we do are actually not what even their Gaia God would want. Because if the Lord made the earth and the Lord knows what the earth wants, then he's telling us this is coming from every direction.
Right.
You've got to honor this.
That's a really good way to say it. Top down, bottom up.
Yeah.
And humanity's being squeezed in between.
And we can avoid that feature of compression. It's a lie, but we can tell ourselves intellectually, well, the way that I understand the world, we're the third rock from the sun, and there's 300 trillion asteroids, and there's 500 quintillion square kilometers of space. It's all, we're like, you can just say there's just so much infinite thing, and it's growing, and we're just this little thing right here. Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, who would ever be interested in us?
Right.
And you think, wow, that's a smart guy.
Right.
Yeah, who's interested in you, dumbass?
Right.
And he says, there's no point to what we're doing here except for what we find subjectively interesting ourselves.
Right.
That's the postmodern trap.
Right.
You just say it's purely subjective what you think and what I think. But when we open this book up and it tells us that we have a purpose and that it's God ordained and that we have the breath of life of the living spirit within us, and he wants to bless us. He wants to bless our water. He wants to bless our bread. He doesn't want us to miscarry.
Yeah.
He doesn't want us to die early.
Yeah.
But we have to honor him by not serving other gods.
Right.
Okay, so now here comes Moloch.
Right.
That's the name in the mouths of the top scientific, intellectual tower elites
right.
that are saying, we don't really know what to do about this.
Right.
It's kind of hidden in the black box of AI, but, we've got our ethics team, and we're just going to keep inventing as much as we possibly can because we got to make money. It has this whole sheen of politics around it that makes it not, it makes you not want to draw an association to the Old Testament. But that's, I think, the value of what we're doing, is we're willing to say, look, we don't have to know exactly what they know. We know the name.
Right.
And we see what's discussed about it.
Well, and in that sense, so you said, so here comes Moloch.
Mm-hmm.
And what Moloch brings in this scenario to that farmer was, I can solve your crop yield problems.
Mhm.
It's going to absolutely limit, and may end up poisoning the end result and the people that eat the end result. But I can solve that problem for you. You can still be profitable.
Yeah, I mean, they did the same thing to wheat farmers. So a wheat farmer literally said, "Oh, my bread will be blessed."
Right. Exactly. That's it. It's not just that it is a turning away from God. It is those alternate systems offer benefit.
Mhm.
And the benefit can be so compelling, either positively as the solution to the problem, or negatively in I won't lose to my competitors.
Mhm.
That the problem of Moloch is it is such a squeeze because there's no way out.
Right, which is, I think that's the value of the story of Daniel, is he says there is a way out.
Yeah.
Fasting and prayer.
Yeah.
That's the way out.
Right.
I'm not going to play this game.
Right.
If that's the rules that are set, I will have faith in God.
Right. Yeah, when they came and said you have to eat the food of the king or this, that, and the other, he said, what if we do it our way and you measure the results?
Because that was food sacrificed to idols.
Right.
And that comes up twice in the letters of Revelation.
Yeah.
To Pergamum and to Thyatira. But I have this against you. You are eating food sacrificed to idols, and you are participating in fornication. Now, the exact language is food sacrificed to idols and fornication, but the verbiage that's used in the phrasing of like, you live where Satan dwells, or you have succumbed to the teaching of Jezebel, or the teaching of Balaam. But the point is using the Old Testament as a reference point for what's happening in the context of Revelation. The believers of those cities are still eating food sacrificed to idols and are still complicit in fornication. Like, they're not honoring the sexual purity laws.
Right.
So there's a New Testament precedent to honor the Old Testament law that says you can't fornicate and you can't eat food sacrificed to idols.
But in terms of the Molochian dilemma, the problem of Moloch.
Yeah, I know you like to call it that way. I mean, it works. It's
The
an
problem
adjective,
of
but-
Moloch is not that it's so threatening and intimidating that we're backed into a corner. It's that it seems so advantageous. We're willing to be backed into the corner. And once we're backed into the corner, you have to keep going further and further into the corner.
Mhm.
There is no, the problem of Moloch is it creates a scenario that spirals downward. It's the race to the bottom that self-perpetuates everyone in accelerating to the bottom.
Mhm.
The person that says, I'm not going to do this anymore, is the guaranteed loser. And so everyone is willing to lose together for the temporary win they get as they crash to the bottom. I don't think I'm saying that well. But
No, I think it's so. The way that I visualize it is with the effect of gravity, because you have weight and meaning and humility. All of those words have the connotation of earthiness, and we live on the planet that weighs us down. So that's what responsibility does: is it anchors you. But in the postmodern blight on intellect, which is everything is subjective and it's just what you think, that is this anti-gravity effect. It's really saying nothing ties you down. It's just what you think.
yeah,
And what's metaphorically happening is you are losing your grip on reality, because the more that you chase this vain, utterly subjective understanding of who you are and what your name is and what your words are and what you do, all of those things that are deracinating you from your peers, from the social context, you can afford to have this illusion of like, yeah, but we're all doing that together, so that's what connects us. But you're actually being pulled the opposite direction of gravity, because you're refusing to be weighed down by the truth. You don't want to be shackled by gravity. You don't want to be constrained by the law or by responsibility. You want to say, I am whoever I am. So you can do that, but you can't conform to the, let's say, the weight of glory and have that at the same time.
right.
So if you want to be tethered down, if you want to be weighed down so that you can walk on the soil, you have to allow that force to act on you constantly. And the more bitter and resentful that you get, that's where I just see the picture, if you will, of somebody that's just floating off the ground.
Right.
But the farther they go away, like as far as that analogy goes in my head, you can lose orbit with the gravity, with the source of meaning. You can become so alienated in your intellectual prowess that you're no longer actually a part of what's happening on earth.
Right.
but you feel free.
Yeah.
You know, I'm no longer constrained by the law
Right.
of gravity. And
Right.
so that's the problem with postmodernism is it's all subjective what I think. It only matters what I think. And if you take that to its logical extent, then you're no longer a part of what we're doing here. We, us in objective reality,
Right.
we will be here when you leave.
Right.
You will go by yourself.
Right.
There's the illusion that other people think that too, and so that means we're connected. But that's like saying that random asteroids are connected.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they're all technically that, but they're not participating with each other because they're not agreeing what unites us.
Yeah.
So this is what we have to do. We have to agree what unites us.
Let's look at this Lex Friedman interview. I think it'll.
Oh wait, did you already play that one? Or
No,
is this,
I don't think so.
Is this the one with Max?
Yeah.
You know, you've interviewed a lot of these people who lead these labs, and you know just as well as I do that they're good people. They're idealistic people. They're doing this first and foremost because they believe that AI has a huge potential to help humanity. And but at the same time, they are trapped in this horrible race to the bottom. Have you read Meditations on Moloch by Scott Alexander?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a beautiful essay on this poem by Ginsberg where he interprets it as being about this monster. It's this game theory monster that pits people against each other in this race to the bottom where everybody ultimately loses.
Yes.
And the evil thing about this monster is even though everybody sees it and understands, they still can't get out of the race, right? A good fraction of all the bad things that we humans do are caused by Moloch. And I like Scott Alexander's naming of the monster, so we humans can think of it as a thing. If you look at why do we have overfishing, why do we have more generally the tragedy of the commons? Why is it that so Liv Boeree, I don't know if you had her on your podcast.
Yeah, she's become a friend. Yeah,
great. She made this awesome point recently that beauty filters that a lot of female influencers feel pressure to use are exactly Moloch in action again. First, nobody was using them, and people saw them just the way they were. And then some of them started using it and becoming ever more plastic fantastic. And then the other ones that weren't using it started to realize that if they want to just keep their market share, they have to start using it too. And and then you're in the situation where they're all using it. And none of them has any more market share or less than before. So nobody gained anything. Everybody lost.
I mean, that's a really simple kind of analogy, but it's, I'm sure, relatable for females. And I know men use it too. But essentially, everyone trades a part of their humanity to look better than they really look because everyone else looks better than they really look. And if I don't do that, I'm going to stand out in my deficiency. So to be competitive, I have to sacrifice what is really me for an artificial version of me. But the net effect is everyone is now doing that, and everyone is now artificial, and I'm not distinguished in any way. So I don't actually gain market share, but I'm in this constant race to always be something I'm not, and AI is helping me do that, but I am more miserable, under more pressure, more anxiety. What if my phone glitches and the filter goes off and now everyone knows what I really look like? And I don't actually, there is no winning point. There's no point where you cross the line and you go,
right,
I just won the race.
Well, yeah, it will go on in perpetuity.
Right.
That's the point. Is there will be the newer thing that because it's that much newer, it's more fashionable. So then you just add that to it. Like the filters really quickly went to where like you got an animal nose and there's like sparkles flying around you and it puts makeup on you. But it started as just like it was just kind of a vignette, or like it would just make it more saturated or something. It was like really corny, and then it got more realistic, and then it got more fantastical, and all along the way it was popular at whatever iteration it was at.
But there's all of these. We could say, well, that's not going to destroy humanity. No, but it's one more inch of artificial reality that we're all surrendering to.
Yeah, and that I would say at the individual level, it is usurping an individual's humanity.
Right.
Because it's reducing their agency, because it represents the outsourcing of agency, which is idolatry. That's the point I keep trying to come back to.
Yeah.
It's like when I look at a lifeless thing, I think in Habakkuk 2 is where it's called. Did I write that down? I think it's in Habakkuk 2. It's like, what is a cast image? What is an idol? What is a teacher of lies?
Right.
Because that's what it is. You look at this lifeless thing that's just made with materials, but then the function of it is what a teacher of lies is doing functionally.
Right.
So it may as well have a life of its own and have its own agency, like Pajau said. And even if we can recognize it, like Max said, you're still unable to stop yourself from submitting to the magnetic draw of it. So a teacher of lies convinces you what's not true, and that warps your understanding. So if this is something that's lifeless, but what it's doing is akin to teaching me a falsehood, then is it really helpful to just talk about it like some bland atomistic material?
Right.
Or is it actually helpful to attribute a spiritual entity to the force that's operating within it?
So that's where this becomes useful again, in a way, because AI is this robot reaching towards the divine connection that humanity exhibits and embodies as the Imago Dei, the image of God. And so AI is that increasingly robotic, artificial presence in our lives. But Moloch is the power behind.
The creepy shadow
Moloch
guy.
is that spiritual will to power that is pressuring us to say, no, you really do belong. Come join, enter the divine fellowship that we uniquely enjoy with God. No, you can be part of that with us. And in fact, we're going to help support and strengthen all the advantages you give us. And so AI becomes integrated beauty filters on our phone. For God's sake, what do we need that for? Except I feel better when I look at myself that way. Thank you. I'm glad you're at the table with us. We want to add to your arms to reach and touch and do this. And behind it, that force that's driving that sacrifice of our essential humanity for whatever the gain is, even to the point of, I don't know where my grandchildren are going to be with this in 10 or 20 years, but that's okay. We'll figure it out because there's too many good things that can come from it.
Yeah.
And I sacrifice future generations for this aberration that is made in my image. That thing is made in my image. I'm made in God's. But I am now turning my attention, my idolatrous attention, to say, how can I be made in that thing's image, even though it's made in mine? And that is, that's a real dilemma. I think we have one more video before you comment that will help. We maybe should have started with this one, but I think this will put it all together for us.
There's a possibility that if you do successfully build something that by definition is orders of magnitude more intelligent, that for the same reason, even though a chimpanzee is much physically stronger than a human, we can just draw a fence around it and control it because we're much smarter. It will be able to do things and predict things that we couldn't even dream of. So we're essentially creating a kind of alien god. And that's like the most high stakes thing that's ever happened on Earth. Even if we think it's only a small chance of happening, we should probably spend at least some resources on making sure that goes well, because there's no guarantee that intelligence correlates with kindness or fairness or caring about biological matter even existing. An AI lives off silicon. We rely on carbon, so we're fundamentally operating on different substrates. So there's a chance this might not go well. And even if you think that chance is very, very tiny, maybe we should just put a little bit into this.
An alien god. I mean, the irony of that video is it still feels really cute. We draw
a circle around the monkey emoji.
Yeah, monkey emoji, and we show the Planet of the Apes, and there's all these pop cultural references that actually diminish the gravity of it. But she's touching on the right things with a smile and a happy conversation. Created an alien god. Do we really know what we're creating? Are we in the investigation even wise enough to parse the data. Meanwhile, billions of dollars, economies, international, multinational corporations, Apple, Google, Amazon, China, North Korea, India, America, everyone is in this race to the bottom to make the best form of this possible, to give us the most advantage possible, and it could literally physically destroy humanity. But I'm more concerned about it destroying this at a spiritual level.
Yeah, and I think as God-fearers, we have to be more concerned about that. Like, it really should be coming down to you as your own person and me as my own person. How are we defending our faith in a time that wants us to conform? That's kind of the perennial problem.
Right.
But if it's what matters for me is how I'm in my particular environment, how am I living out my faith?
Right.
So that's kind of an abstractly perennial problem, but for each person, it's always very, very particular.
Right.
What are you doing with that decision that you have?
Right.
And that's where it can be difficult. The more enmeshed that you are in these systems, like if I have every social media platform and I'm active on it constantly throughout the day, then I'm also probably likely to hear somebody say social media is bad for you. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it is. But that's in one ear out the other. Like I can kind of give the response I know I'm supposed to give, but if I'm still doing the thing constantly all the time, then I don't know how to actually reflect on what that's jeopardizing in my behavior. I don't know how to have the perspective to approach that objectively. I'm enmeshed in it. So this affects a lot of different aspects of our agency and our humanity, but it's hard to talk about because when you take something that's that weighty and you try to pass it off, like if you're not ready to receive that weight, that can just be crushing, and it might just be like, oh, I'm not touching that.
Right.
I see what you're doing, but like I don't want to really reflect on how I might be complicit in this.
Right.
So the call to humility is the call to respond to the pull, the weight of gravity, and that's what I think is clearly that's why Israel was Israel, is because they were heeding the covenant of the law of Moses, and when they were breaking away from that, that was the call to return, to honor the covenant, to remember. It was to choose to submit so that you can be free. Like
and by definition, that choice was Yahweh, not the ways and systems and beliefs of the other gods.
Right. Even the tyranny that you preferred in Egypt, go out into the wilderness that you may serve me.
Right.
Like, that is the point. That is the alternative, is you are under a foreign tyranny, or you can be under my sovereignty, but you are serving something.
Right.
So you have to choose what you're going to serve.
Right.
And I had one thing I wanted to throw in here about I was trying to tie it back to Exodus 23, but the thing that I just can't get out of my head is it's so difficult to really be honest about what we're giving up responsibility for, because you've already justified why you're giving it up. That's why you gave it up. So it's almost like you have to be willing to go back into the past to admit, okay, here's where I looked the other way on purpose.
Whoa.
Or here's where I'm justifying my behavior today. And that's really scary to do, because that's like going through a portal to another world where now you don't know what you're going to be responsible for on the other side of it. That's why you're ignorant of it right now. But I think that's the Christian call. That's why it's take up your cross and follow me, is because you are going to have to make a sacrifice. So if you do that the right way, oriented to the right thing, it's going to go well with you. That's Exodus 23. I'm going to bless your bread and your water, and you're not going to be sick, and you're not going to miscarry, and you'll live out the full number of your days. So that really is how good the reward is, even in this life. But what it requires is submission, humility. And that's, I know that you agree that that's what we're trying to have all of this couched within, is the context of how we live a better life. But that's why it's scary to talk about tough things like social media and sacrificing your children, and how it's tempting to keep that in the realm of the abstract.
Yeah.
right? To just be like, yeah, that is a big problem.
Right.
Good thing I'm not doing that.
Right.
Right.
And then reach
That's
for your
scary
phone.
for those people,
Yeah.
right? So when you choose to really embody those principles, it's helpful to think of the symbolism of passing your children over to Moloch. Passing them over is resigning your responsibility. You're giving up responsibility. It's saying, that's not in my hands now.
Right.
Thank the gods.
Right.
That's their job now. I
Right.
can just be me. But that's not our job. Our job is to maintain the responsibility that the Lord has allowed us to steward. Like the parable of the virgins we were talking about, the parable of the talents, owning that responsibility and being cognizant of the time in which we were given that responsibility. So that's how I think that's how we wage war against Moloch, is by doing what Daniel did and saying, I'm not going to eat the food that's sacrificed to
I don't know
idols."
the outcome
Yeah.
of not being in this race to the bottom, but I'm not going to be in the race.
Yeah, because you have the orientation that allows you to say, I know the future is better for me if I do this.
Right.
And you can't afford that as a scientist. You have to say, I don't know what the future is.
Yeah.
I know some things it's not, but I can't think that something's going to be better.
Actually, it is fundamentally repositioning us back into the leap of faith,
Yeah.
because everything else is empirically defining the benefits that Moloch gives,
Yeah.
that AI gives. I do get that beauty filter. I do get that bump in the stock, the algorithmic faster trade or whatever it is. I get this benefit, this benefit, this benefit. We're all racing to the bottom, but I can at least see where I'm going with the benefits along the way.
I'm at least running with the herd.
Right.
I at least know that's known territory. I at least know the direction this is going.
And if I choose,
However little.
if I choose to go against that, I don't have the certainty, except for the promise of a good God who says, "Come out of Ur of the Chaldees to the land
Then
I
you're
will show
Abraham.
you."
Then you're Abraham.
And we're back in that interdependent, believing faith in His goodness to get us there.
And I'm so glad that that's how Joshua is reported framing it, was your ancestors, Terah and Abraham and Nahor, who lived across the Euphrates and served other gods.
Right.
He was on the other side of the river is your heritage. They served other gods. They chose to follow the God. Now we're here.
Right.
So that's our legacy.
Right.
We're only doing what they did first. And if we stop doing that, the land vomits us up. The top down and bottom up. It's not going to go well for us.
Well, honestly, Hanson, I think I'm not entirely confident that in this we have really captured Moloch. I think we've introduced it. We're going to have to talk about it more. We're going to have to unpack this because it's kind of a heady topic. It takes a while to get your head around and to really see what is that dilemma. But I think we've at least got it on the table.
Yeah,
We'll keep going.
but let me end with this, and because I think when this is an example of when a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can say 1,000 words, but then maybe sometimes it's just easier to point.
Yeah.
So Stanley Kubrick's movie, I think, has the most succinct picture of the problem of Moloch, which is that cut at the beginning. I mean, it's like famous in film history, but it's when the monkeys have used the bone that allowed them to kill the warring faction, and then they look at the monolith, but the bone was the weapon that allowed them to gain that victory. So that's a symbol of technology.
Mhm.
So they throw it up in the air in victory, and then it cuts to the spaceship, which is run by Hal, which is the demise of humanity on the ship. So it's like across the sociological, right, exactly. Thousands of years
Right.
ago, technology was what allowed them to gain the victory, but that's going to come back and bite you in the future when it takes on a life of its own and has authority over you, because they're floating in space.
Right.
So there's so much imagery there and so much symbolism, and the point is we become so dependent on technology. We're literally floating in anti-gravity because of technology, and now we can have its way with us because we're deracinated from the weight of gravity.
Wow.
And we use technology to get ourselves there. So that's a visionary director that gives you the picture of the spiritual reality. It takes place in 5 seconds. That moment is probably 1 second.
Yeah.
But then when you try to say what's going on there, you've got to use a lot of heady words and the concepts. It's just very hard to do that. So I don't think that we're like that far off base. It's just how hard it is to go that far up in the tower of philosophy and then try to bring it back down to like how do you live your life
Yeah.
based on that information. But here we are doing it. I mean, we're trying.